Don Quixote is a classic novel by Spanish author Miguel de Cervantes, first published in 1605. It tells the story of a man who, after reading too many books about chivalry, becomes convinced that he is a knight and sets out on a series of adventures with his loyal squire, Sancho Panza. In the first chapter, we are introduced to the main character, Alonso Quijano Don Quixote, a middle-aged man from La Mancha in central Spain. He becomes obsessed with tales of chivalry and decides to become a knight himself, taking the name Don Quixote. He sets out on his first adventure, accompanied by his faithful servant, Sancho Panza. Along the way, Don Quixote believes windmills to be giants and tries to attack them. He is thrown from his horse, and Sancho helps him back to his home. The chapter also introduces us to Don Quixote's love for Dulcinea, whom he has never met. Chapter 2, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza arrive at an inn, which Don Quixote believes to be a castle. He mistakes the innkeeper's daughter, who he believes to be a princess, for his lady love, Dulcinea. Don Quixote challenges some travelers to a joust and is soundly defeated. Don Quixote is later beaten by the innkeeper and his servants, who try to cure him of his madness by force. The chapter also introduces us to the concept of chivalry and the idea of honor. Chapter 3, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza encounter a group of merchants, who they believe to be knights. Don Quixote attacks them, but is badly beaten. He and Sancho are left in the countryside, battered and bruised. A farmer finds them and brings them back to their village, where they are ridiculed by their neighbors. This chapter shows the consequences of Don Quixote's delusions and how they affect those around him. Chapter 4, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza come across a group of prisoners, who they set free. Don Quixote believes he has accomplished a great feat, but in reality, the prisoners were released as part of a local custom. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are once again left humiliated. On their way back to their village, they are ambushed by a group of thieves who steal their belongings and leave them stranded in the middle of nowhere. This chapter shows the danger that Don Quixote and Sancho Panza face on their adventures. Chapter 5, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza encounter a group of actors who are putting on a play. Don Quixote believes that the play is real and that the actors are in danger. He charges onto the stage to rescue the actors, causing chaos and ruining the play. The actors retaliate by beating up Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. This chapter highlights the theme of Don Quixote's delusions and how they affect those around him, as well as the absurdity of his actions. Chapter 6, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza come across a group of pilgrims, who they believe to be in need of assistance. Don Quixote tries to intervene, but ends up causing more harm than good. He accidentally sets fire to the countryside, and is forced to flee with Sancho. This chapter further shows the consequences of Don Quixote's delusions and his lack of awareness of the real world. Chapter 7, Don Quixote charges into battle against what he believes to be an army, but is quickly defeated by the shepherds. The shepherds beat Don Quixote with clubs and leave him on the ground, badly injured. Sancho Panza tries to help his master, but he too is beaten by the shepherds. This chapter highlights the physical danger that Don Quixote's delusions can pose to himself and those around him. It also shows the anger and frustration that Don Quixote's actions can provoke in others. Chapter 8, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza arrive at a castle, which Don Quixote believes to be enchanted. He enters the castle, where he is subjected to a series of bizarre and comical trials. In one trial, he must fight a giant, which turns out to be a windmill. In another trial, he is forced to wear a suit of armor that is too small for him. Don Quixote is ultimately released, but not before he has been thoroughly humiliated. This chapter showcases the absurdity of Don Quixote's delusions, and how they lead him into increasingly comical and dangerous situations. Don Quixote is a masterpiece of Spanish literature and a timeless exploration of the human condition. Through Don Quixote's delusions, we see the dangers of losing touch with reality, as well as the power of imagination and the importance of chasing our dreams.